Hello, I'm Phil Shackelford, past chair of the Bryan College Station Chamber of Commerce. We're back with our Chamber Chat series on impact fees, and we're so excited to have a good friend of the Bryan College Station Chamber and someone who's done an excellent job at the helm of the City of College Station, our city manager, Bryan Woods. Bryan, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Chamber doing this series. Good opportunity for people to get some information about a really important topic.
And Bryan, let's just start with this. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe who you are, how you spend your time when you're not running the City of College Station, which I know is 24 hours a day. But tell us what some of your passions are and what you're most excited about when it comes to College Station.
Yeah, sure. Well, just a little background. I come from an engineering construction background. I spent most of my career in infrastructure, building big projects and doing private land development, and then switched over into governmental work about 7 years ago, running capital projects for the city of New Braunfels, and eventually became an assistant city manager there, and then became city manager here a little over 3 years ago. I've been back about 6 months now, but I spent about a year before that on deployment. I'm a Naval Reserve officer in the Civil Engineering Corps, so CB, for those of you who may know what that is. But I always joke, I don't do a whole lot between city management, family, and the Navy Reserve. That's the Navy's kind of my other time. I don't really play golf or do any of those other things. That's what I feel with it. But I enjoy it. I think I have always been someone who enjoyed service, and I certainly get the opportunity to do that in this job and my other. And College Station, obviously, you couldn't pick a better place to be if you're in the military and you believe in service. It's a community full of people, whether they serve in the military or not, who just do incredible things. And I think the part, although there are lots of exciting things that come along with being in College Station, great businesses, and obviously you've got the greatest university on the planet in College Station. But the biggest thing to me is the people, and I think everybody who comes here, whether they come to visit, whether it's an opposing team coming to come to Kyle Field, or it's businesses coming from around the world, or people that move here for one reason or another, I think the thing that really makes it unique is the quality of the people, and you feel that immediately. And for me and my family coming here and being here not all that long before I had to be gone for a year, and the support they got, just really tremendous. And I think that's something you can do a lot of great things as a city, as a chamber, but nobody can manufacture that. So we've got an advantage over to me anywhere in the world. And I would say it's the biggest small town in Texas. Everybody is there and does great things. And at the same time, we've got a world-class university and resources that other people don't.
Well, absolutely, Bryan. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, on behalf of certainly our Chamber of Commerce, thank you for your service, the United States Navy and the reserves, and appreciate all that you do in that capacity, especially as we come upon Veterans Day.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and certainly, like I said, can't say enough about the support from this community. Really, really special.
Absolutely. Well, and Bryan, let's, look, this is a complex topic that we're going to study. You and I have visited about this a lot, and I appreciate your willingness to engage on this topic. But for the benefit of those that are viewing this video, help them understand the city's role as a regulator of impact fees, and perhaps even the difference of how you might discuss things today as a member of the staff of the City of College Station versus how the political subdivision might approach this topic.
Yeah, sure. And I think you said it best. It is complex, and I think anytime you're dealing with the government and ultimately people's money and how that funds the government, it's important to understand it the best you can. Impact fees were something that started in the 80s through the Texas legislature. The idea was that you kind of hear this saying still today, that growth would pay for itself. And really what that means is it was a way, call it an impact fee. Some people refer to it as a tax. Ultimately, it's a government getting revenue from a citizen. So you can call it a tax or a fee, whatever it wants, but that's what it comes down to. And it was a way that a specific group of people related to new homes would pay for this infrastructure versus how you've done it in the past, which is on the tax rate, the property tax rate, and the sales tax rate. So our role as the city staff wise is to do a few things. So once council adopted impact fees and put them in place, we have to do a capital improvement plan, which basically outlines, hey, here's all the things that we believe will need to be built because of growth. And then we have to make sure that makes sense. The new roads, the new water, the new sewer. We assign costs to those. They're broken up into areas, and without going into all the detail, we have to do that along with a consultant to basically say, here are the needs, here's this overall cost. And then we have to go through and make sure that we've accounted for the growth piece in the right way. Here's how we believe the growth is going to happen. And we do that over a 10-year span. And then we're required by law to update it every 5 years, which, costs change, the growth patterns change, all those things. So that's our base job, is to try and get all of those things right. And that's a complex topic in itself. Where are we going to grow? How are we going to grow? Do we need this road? What's built by development? What's built by the city? How do we pay for those things? So our job is to get all that together and try and get lots of input. And then ultimately where it goes up to the council, sometimes you'll see a city staff recommend certain things, but really the council has the job at that point to look at that information and say, okay, how do we balance this just like we do any other tax or fee with what we feel like is right for the community and what the values of the community are? Because I think one of the things that gets thrown around a lot of times with impact fees is impact fees will not solve every problem. And, at the same time, they are a piece of the overall picture, and deciding what we are going to build for infrastructure that hopefully supports that growth that we know we need. And then how do we pay for it? And that can be impact fees. It can be on the property tax rate, which we have done historically here more of than impact fees, on the sales tax rate. And then how all that plays together when you pull one of those levers, what does it do to the other one? So the council gets a very fun job of trying to decide not only how to impact fees, what level should they be in, but what else happens? What projects are we going to do? What's our tax rate going to look like? All that stuff. But that's where it goes to them to make that policy decision.
Brian, thank you for that explanation. And let me ask, before we get too deep into the topic, because that's a very good working definition for us to move with going forward. Again, it is a complex topic. Could you share the various ways in which the city has provided opportunities to the public and development community for conversation and education on the topic of impact fees? I know there were some public engagement issues. Talk about what you've done to this point, and then talk about what the future holds in the coming weeks.
Yeah, and I think I've been involved with impact fee discussions. Now this is my second city, and then I was involved with them in other cities when I was on the private side. And just like any other source of government revenue, I mean, there can be contentious and a lot of opinions, and again, there should be a lot of engagement on that, because that's what makes things work the right way. So for our part, we're always trying to do more and reach out to get more buy-in, whether people agree or disagree, at least that they feel like there's an opportunity. There are specific things that are required according to the state law, and of course we adhere to that. There's an IFAC, which is the Impact Fee Advisory Committee that we present to, and that people see that really in the form of planning and zoning, plus a few members who represent other pieces that wouldn't be on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And then obviously it has to go in front of council, and that happens in a couple of ways. We have the CIP, the Capital Improvement Plan for impact fees, that goes to both of those groups, and they adopt that. And then we come back with kind of the calculations that show here's what the impact fees, the max fee could be, and then they decide what they would set them at. So we also did, you mentioned a few, we did breakfast, which we do these periodically with we call it our builders breakfast, where we had builders and developers talk about this. We did a special kind of set aside meeting where we've done that. And then we've had a lot of meetings with not just developers, but, people in the city, from neighborhood organizations and general citizens who, want to understand it better and understand, how this, may impact things for them. So we've done, I think, a pretty good job of reaching out there and making sure people understand what's going on, trying to put that information out. Certainly that doesn't mean everybody is going to agree, but I think the important part for us is, can we get it out there and give people an understanding to where they can make their voice heard on something, even if they disagree with the staff on something we did it, as long as it's out there, that's kind of our goal.
Absolutely, Brian. And anything that the city would like to tag on this conversation, we're happy to provide the links to the Impact
Great.
Fee 101. Yeah. And as a reminder to those that are watching and listening, you can also view one of our chamber chat series on impact fees. Dr. Purdue from the Real Estate Research Center here in College Station also did just a yeoman's job of trying to break what could have probably been 3 or 4 hours into 45 minutes to an hour. And so, but it does highlight the complexity of this and everything that's at work here. Let's dive into it. You've given us a good working definition of an impact fee with regard to revenue generation. How are you going to put it together? Can I just ask as a follow-up to what you said earlier, because you did mention some people view it as a tax, some people view it as, just an impact fee. Give us, tell us about that.
Yeah, this is a question that comes up all the time. Every time I've ever discussed this, and I think sometimes from a governmental side, you'll hear people say it's not a tax, and I think that can be a little bit of a rub the wrong way in this. And I don't think that's important. I think the reason it's called a fee is because it doesn't apply to everyone in the jurisdiction, versus, if we look at property tax, it would apply to everyone in the jurisdiction. But from a practical sense, it is a way that the government generates revenue. So, how the specifics of it and how you do it may affect whether you think it should happen or not, but it's a source of revenue for the government. So it is a citizen in our community, builders, developers, however it comes up, there is a fee that comes up that goes into the government to pay for things. And, those are broken up, other ways you see that again, property tax, sales tax, fees for services. So something you may rent or do with the government that you pay a fee for. So I think that's something that we can, hopefully everybody can just agree that whatever you want to call it, that's what it is. It's revenue coming to the government. And that's where people, obviously have an interest and should. The key there to me, I think, is that affects how people feel of whether there should or shouldn't be impact fees. Is, whether it's a property tax that everybody is going to pay into for infrastructure, or are we going to say it's only people that fall under this impact fee? Because I think kind of the key point, if people don't know, and if they watch the previous series, I think they probably will know this, but this impact fees only get placed on new properties or if you expand those properties. So it's anything that creates additional demand. So it's not something that would go into effect for existing homeowners in an existing house. But I think it's also important to note that it doesn't mean that just because it's only going to be something that affects new residents in the community. Because if I live, in a house and I decide to move to a new house that's being built, then that new house and property is going to have an impact fee on it. So it doesn't look at, is the person a resident here or are they coming in and be a first-time resident? It just looks at a new property or an expansion of an existing one.
All right, let me ask, and I think one of the things that I personally have trouble with this, and I hear it out in the community, is on the topic of single-family housing. Is there a concern among staff that the impact fee amounts that have been, let's just throw out a number, there's some being bantied about, but $20,000 of a max fee or more, make that single family house more difficult to attain, particularly to a first time home buyer. I just think back to, when I bought my first home. I think about my parents when they bought their first home. Um, where is the city at in trying to determine what's appropriate, what produces revenue, but keeps the market moving? I'm just curious as to your take.
Yeah, and some of that is, I guess, ultimately that is really the council's kind of policy decision where they feel.
Sure.
What I can tell you from our side is, this is a constant topic being discussed with impact fees, and I've read a lot of study and literature on this, and you get differing opinions by people that are much smarter than me. I think one of the key things I always stress is whichever way you fall on it, the market to me is what sets the price for housing. So, I don't think you can say that impact fees will not affect housing, especially when you have, in our case, we're one jurisdiction immediately adjacent to another jurisdiction, where we have differing impact fees. We also have differing tax rates. We also have differing utility rates. So all those things go into play. But when it comes to housing affordability, I think you have to really dig into it, because, I always look at it and say, if I'm selling my house for a certain price, things come along with that, realtor fees and closing fees and whatever. If those just all of a sudden went away, I wouldn't sell the house for any cheaper, because I'm selling it at what the market would allow me to sell it for. And I would say that, that's some of the same thing I think you have to look at when you look at these things. Now, at the same time, you can read some of the literature that says, impact fees do, especially when you have, competition in the area. Any kind of an addition to the cost can cause a difference in that. So I think on the College Station side, housing affordability is always, a challenge. It's a challenge everywhere in the country, but because we have, a limited amount of land within our jurisdiction, the land costs, can be higher, and these sort of things. There's a lot of contributing factors to it. So I think it's a concern, where the community and ultimately the council comes down on how to regulate that. That's really their job. Well, I guess our role is as much as we can to bring those questions up, because I think the same question has to be asked if depending on how you feel about it. If you say we're going to eliminate an impact fee and we believe that's going to lower the cost of housing initially, well, if you still have to build that infrastructure, and you agree that you're going to build infrastructure, then are you going to do it on the tax rate? Well, that's going to be spread around the whole community, and that's okay if that's the way that the community wants to go. But there still is that means that the cost of living, the cost of being in that house is going to be absorbed at some point. So I think the debates and the questions that come around it are, where, how do we do that, and what's the timing of it? And it's the same conversations you see about property tax rates and valuations of homes and costs for services. And I think, I wish I had a good, clear answer and could tell everybody this is it, but it really does come down to where does the community and the council see that kind of spot is where we are competitive in a market. We're doing the things we want to do as a community, and we're able to provide the infrastructure for that growth, so that we don't get in a situation where we're not able to keep up with that. But there's also, just since you asked about affordability, it's one of the things the council did bring up, and you see it all the time. There are ways there are ways to waive impact fees if there is some kind of real economic benefit on a project. You see this a lot of times with things that come in that commercial or create a lot of jobs or something like that. But there's also the opportunity to do that as it relates to affordable housing or specific types of products that the council or the community wants to see come in. I'll say though, it can be a challenge to figure out exactly how you do that, because again, if you're looking at the market and you pull the fees out of it, if we pulled all the fees out of everything that we charge as a city right now, I don't think you would see the cost of those houses drop by that, because the market says that's what it is. So I think the challenge is how do you figure out a way, if that's something the community wants to see happen, as a governmental entity, to work with the private sector and the nonprofits to actually create a situation where affordable housing is around. I mean, it is so complex, and you see it in every jurisdiction in the country.
Right. No, that's very helpful. And I know you've been in the private sector, you've been in the public sector around this issue. And, you're saying that if we were to pull all the fees out, the price won't necessarily go down. I guess, what I am hearing and what I hear from our development community is that if you put the fees in, then the price will most assuredly go up. Is that an approach that is accepted?
Yeah, I think I think there's lots of opinions, but my take on that, and hearing from a lot of other, especially economists, work that I've read on these type of issues is, again, if a house was $250,000 and you added fees in, the person that could pay $250 can't all of a sudden pay more than that house is worth. So if you could raise the cost of a house, just like any product, and the market would bear it, then that would be what you would sell it at, because that's good business. What I think, though, gets lost in that. So I don't believe that fees set the market price for a house, but they absolutely impact everything that goes into how that house is being sold. So, the builder needs to make a profit, the developer needs to make a profit, the land seller needs to make a profit. That's how the whole system works, and we want that to happen. So if you do something, whether it's governmentally or land price or whatever, that makes it less profitable than somewhere else, or not profitable to build a certain type of housing, then I think you can see an effect where it creates a challenge. But I don't think I mean, it's just my opinion, having seen it from both sides. I don't think it sets the price. I think the market does that. It can, and I think this has been discussed before, it can say, okay, well, if the market says a house is going to be X price, and because we have all these other costs that go into developing and building a house, and there's a greater fee cost or a greater land cost, then we can't build the same size house or same product, or same size lot as we could before. And I think that absolutely is the truth. And so that's something that I think, again, the community has to look at and say, where do we fall on that? A lot of times the way you see cities address these challenges is they up density, because the more dense you get, then that some things work out as it relates to those equations. But again, that's a community kind of decision about what does that look like, because there is an impact. I just don't see it as it being a linear, if you raise fees here, the price of housing will go up, and if you lower fees, the price of housing will go down. I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I would hope too that when people are looking at those, they're also looking at the long-term affordability, because the mortgage price is one thing, but again, you have other things, the tax rate, the utility rates, all those things that go into that, affordability calculator.
Absolutely. No, and in your previous comments discussing a waiver, I just, for what it's worth, one voice in our community and the thought of encouraging home ownership and the American dream and that first-time home buyer, it just seems to me that that's the type of an investment that we would want to encourage if there was any way that we could continue to do that. And so I would hope that part of that might be to consider a waiver, should things go forward.
Yeah, and council, just so you know, council asked us when we took the capital improvement plan, they that's something they've openly expressed, what would be a potential mechanism for waiving fees for, again, affordable housing, or maybe there are other opportunities that are out there, and they do have that. Again, I think that's a place where the council has the ability. It's important for the community to communicate what are those values, like what do we want to see there.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more on that. And Bryan, let me move into with regard to business, because these fees can also, of course, businesses build, they create construction, they grow, they expand. And one of the concerns that I have, and it's kind of in the same way, and that I'm hearing out in the community again, the same way we've had, we're looking for ways that first-time home buyers can be encouraged. Certainly I would hope that there might be a way, to weed out perhaps small businesses or certain sizes of businesses. I was reading, trying to become educated as much as I can. It's a complex topic, but I was reading about, a drive up and the various ways a fee can be calculated on something. And I get to thinking, gosh, if a small business wanted to double the size of their office and built environment, or let's say they have need for a drive up window because they handle a lot of customer exchanges, it seems as if the impact fee would be pretty substantial on their business. Do you think there's a way to also carve out waivers for small businesses of some sort?
Yeah, I will. I don't know that I've ever seen maybe a specific small business carve out, but there are definitely, the council has the ability to, through an economic development agreement, look at businesses that have some kind of benefit that they believe waiving fees, and not just impact fees, but other things, and coming up with agreements based on what those businesses do. Again, I would say on the small business side, there's some legality to what you can and can't waive or set fees at. Council also does have the ability to set the fees by use differently. They're all based on these calculations that show, again, what is this going to generate. And what I would say is it's definitely a concern, and one of those things you have to think about just as much as whether it's housing or any type of a development. Again, what is the impact on them, and the same thing, what is the impact of a tax rate or any of these other things, and at the same time understand that anything that happens, a great thing, a business comes and it generates more traffic, that also helps to generate the need for bigger roads, and that costs money. So it's just, where does it come from is really the question. And that's why I say, kind of from the beginning, impact fees alone are not the answer to any and all problems, and they certainly have challenges, and people have concerns about them. And so that's why I think you have to look at it in conjunction with everything else, and say, okay, where are we on kind of all things, and what environment does that set for, whether it's a single family home or a business, to be able to operate here. And the reality is obviously, we have the city of Bryan right next to us, and we look at each other and kind of figure out how those things work. But we're competing with people all over the state and all over the country for things. So it's about understanding all of those pieces, and making sure that we're competitive in that, and then also that we're competitive in the sense that we have the funding to build the infrastructure that we know those businesses will need. So I mean, it is complex, but I think generally any of these that I've been involved in, those always are a consideration. And then it just comes down to, where does the community land on how we want to set these things? What burden are we going to bear from the tax base side, and what burden are we going to bear on the impact fee side? And again, I'll leave those questions to the elected officials. I unfortunately don't have to weigh in on that.
Fair enough, Bryan. Let me list off, in visiting with a bunch of folks, there's a number of businesses that our community has wanted to see. You could take one off, put one on, but here's just a few I've heard. One won't surprise you, I know. Papa Do's, Trader Joe's, In-N-Out, Waffle House, Sprouts, Whole Foods, all sorts of fun things. I know, we also talk about large job creators, technology jobs, and white collar job creators. Bryan, is there any concern, as difficult as it may have been to get some of these entities here to this point, is there any concern that the business side of the impact fee, I guess, challenges the efforts of our very able-bodied economic development folks and your economic development team? How should we view that?
Well, I mean, I think you have to look at anything as a potential obstacle or a potential opportunity. So yes, I mean, we look at anything, and same thing, we look at our tax rate, which our tax rate is much lower than a lot of folks, but it's still something we always have to look at. Impact fees is something we have to look at. At the same time, though, we have to look at, do we have the infrastructure to attract these folks? Because if we don't, then that's a the third leg of that stool as well. So yeah, we look at it. We've had impact fees that were set 5 years ago, before I was here, and I would say I think we've been very successful at attracting businesses and things. Some of it, not specifically the ones that you've mentioned, but a lot of other ones that have been, and certainly Costco was one that was on the list when I got here, and some other ones you can think of. So we've been successful at that, and sometimes that involves, again, those economic development agreements and looking at those impact fees. I wouldn't say that I think businesses don't pay attention to that. They certainly do, but I think the first thing they look at is what kind of market they go into. And we have, especially recently, gotten so much interest because we are a great market. And they also, though, they look at the same thing and say, what does it cost us to build, and what can we make here, and what is it going to take for us to do that? And so they certainly, if they don't come up in the beginning, all that stuff comes up as it relates to what it's going to take to get them here when we're negotiating. So it definitely comes up, and you definitely don't want to create an environment where people don't feel like they'll be able to come in. But I think while you can never rest on your laurels, and it's always, what can we do moving forward? I think we've been successful with it, and you can look at a lot of different ways where, impact fees could potentially be a challenge because there's a cost there. But then at the same time, they also can help provide infrastructure that's necessary to bring some of those people in. But it has to be a consideration, just like everything we do has to be, because anytime the topic of impact fees is complex, but then you weave it in with everything else that goes on with the government, the quality of life, and the ability to bring people in. And anytime you pull on one lever, it affects something else. So we definitely consider that, and it's something you work within. And again, I know I keep saying it, but it really comes back to trying to look at things holistically and say, do we have the package that we want as a community, whether it's for the people who live here and are paying taxes, or if we're trying to recruit people in, is it the right mix of it? And, you see some communities who just, they don't do impact fees, and you see some of them that are at the max, and you can go out and see successful communities with both models. I mean, you'll see some of them when we present, some of the names, and you'll recognize them. And, coming from New Braunfels, which has, much higher impact fees than we have here, you could look at that and say, oh, well, see, they have high impact fees and they've been very successful. It's not the same city we are. There are different aspects of it. You can go look at other cities and see they have zero impact fees and they've been very successful. So, again, to me, it's not a right or a wrong, or one way is the best way. It's where do we fall on that continuum of what makes sense for us? How do we accomplish what we want? But that's the biggest thing I would tell people, is that you can look at examples all over the state of Texas and find very successful communities who have different tax rates, different utility rates, different impact fee rates. But I think what you find is there's a mix there that kind of makes sense. And that's where I really want to make sure we present the information so that the council finds that spot that the community feels like, yeah, this is where we need to be.
That's very wise. I mean, there's a lot to that, and there's a lot to unpack within that. And I think, you can tell that you're really putting in, and pardon me if I say this, but I think what I see in you is a city manager that also wants to be a part of a long-term future and not make some quick decisions and move on. And so what I see is I want to build the community that I would want to be a part of. And so I can personally appreciate the amount of effort that you're putting into the dialogue, the questions, the answers, and your strategy, frankly.
I think for our part, it's, again, not having worked for government my whole life, anytime you are, as a private citizen, you're contributing to the government, you have a right and responsibility to be engaged. And, we certainly I don't always do everything right, but I think that's our responsibility. And we're fortunate to live in a city and in a community where we have extremely intelligent, engaged people. And while they have their own jobs and their own lives that they have to do to make this community successful, these type of topics are important, and they affect them individually, and they affect the community. So, we do what we can to make sure that people understand it. But I think if there's one message, to kind of echo what I said before, is the big thing for us is to set a vision, set where we want to go. There are different ways to get there, and we have these conversations all the time when we do budgets. And I'll take a page from my CFO. I've never seen a city government that had all the revenue they needed, or had, the projects were all going to get done. And we are in such a good place as a city. And however we decide to move forward, if it's raising impact fees, if it's lowering impact fees, if it's whatever we do with the tax rate, I think we're going to do well, and we're going to build the infrastructure. We're going to attract great people, because we have a resource here, as I said in the beginning, between Texas A&M University and the people that live here that other people don't have. So I think it's important that we have the discussion, but we don't see it as this is a one-time. If we don't make the right call, we're gonna be in trouble. This is something that can change all the time. Actually, by law, the council can change the collection rate of these impact fees, as they want to from the state side. So what happens, though, is because you're required every 5 years to update the fees, that becomes kind of the natural place where people talk about it. I hope that this is something that we talk about kind of in a more continuous vein, because there will be opportunities for maybe a particular housing opportunity or a business that needs to come up. And I think we need to make sure that we're tracking when we talk about those individual ideas with what we talked about on a whole and where the community wants to be. But it's anytime you're talking about the government and the citizens' money, it's a lively topic, and it should be. I mean, it is. I tell people all the time that we manage other people's money, and they work hard to get that money, and it's our job to provide them services. And at the end of the day, we're talking about building these roads and water and sewer lines. But the other part of our job is police and fire and public works and parks and all these things we provide. So it's all part of that big picture.
Absolutely. Bryan, let me ask one more thing. And you kind of got into the challenges of infrastructure and all the expenses that a city incurs. And I'm going to do my best to ask this question with clarity, but please qualify it and help me unpack it. Because I'm sure you're very aware, you keep track of these things. Several groups have kind of brought forth the point to me and to others that City of College Station has a fiscal policy that provides for an 18% reserve, just put back and put aside to ensure that, the fiscal stability of the city. Makes sense to me. What they're saying is that there is actually double that amount or more put back. Could you maybe qualify what is the city putting those funds aside for? I know there's immense infrastructure needs. Is that what it is? Is the fiscal policy need an update? I leave it to you, but I am curious to hear of that, in the vein that, as you know, so many small businesses operate on a shoestring budget or on this. They operate on what they have. And I think it's a bit difficult for everybody to look at and say, well, wait a minute, they don't need an impact fee. They got money. But folks understand that.
Yeah, it's a great question. You can make the same argument about any other way that we take in revenue about what is it that we need. So without pulling out the budget and talking specifically, but I would encourage people, if you ever want to go read through the budget, there are varying degrees of detail, from a one sheet that kind of tells you things to all the way down. If you want to go into every individual dollar that gets spent, you can see that. But to kind of talk about it generally, we have fund balance requirements, and we are currently, when you talk about our general fund, which doesn't include electric, water, sewer, we're at 18%. We actually started raising that percentage in my first year that we got here, with the goal of pushing it up higher, which I'll kind of get to in a minute. We stopped that because of COVID, and we just didn't know where things were going to be. I mean, at the time, we were trying to make sure we weren't going to have to pull from that reserve to run things. Now, we ended up doing very well. We saw sales tax growth over the last year, we've had the best year of sales tax that we've ever had, and we actually never saw it fall, which is was far better than we predicted. And you had a lot of people in the community who thought we weren't predicting it to be dire enough. So I would say some of that extra money comes from that. We had budgeted at one point where we pulled a lot of things back and said, these are things that we can put off for a year. Let's pull them back because we don't know what this year is going to look like. So there's some money sitting there. From a policy perspective, though, while the policy is at 18%, we have traditionally held more than that, definitely above 20, and we've tried to shoot at 25%. And yeah, you're right. From a business perspective, one, it could be challenging to do that. And two, you really wouldn't want to do that because if you have 25% of your revenue, it's not making you money. The difference is while we try to run a lot of things like a business, we ultimately are a governmental entity. And there are some things we do that cannot fail. So as terrible as an example as it was for everybody, the Winter Storm Uri is exactly why we carry that. So, over a period of 5 days, and I won't belabor the topic, but, we spent over $40 million when the annual electric budget is, around 90. So, and nobody's electric rates went up. And the reason they didn't go up is because we had the money and the fiscal policies in place to be able to absorb, that terrible, terrible event. Same thing when we look at the general fund. If we saw something like COVID and it really caused a massive impact, A&M at the time, we didn't know if they were going to be having class and what is it going to look like without football games. And we turned out well. I think it shows the strength of the private sector in our community and the things that those business owners did and the stability, hopefully, of the community. But we had to be prepared because what can't happen is we can't say, well, we have 18% and that's going to run us for a few months. And then after that, what happens to police? What happens to fire? What happens? We have to run. The water has to stay going on. The electricity has to stay. We have to be able to repair those things. So that's why we maintain those fund balances. Now, specifically in this case, a point in time, and it's an interesting kind of argument that's being made to you. I think a friend of mine who's a CFO in another city said, I've had similar questions, and it's kind of like if somebody asked you how much money you have in your pocket right after your birthday party where everybody was giving you a bunch of money, that wouldn't be what it is all the time. Well, in this case, although I wouldn't call it a birthday party, the federal government has, pushed out this ARPA funding. And so for the city of College Station, our overall amount that we're eligible for is $29.5 million. There was another $3.5 million that we got earlier on through another federal project. So if you take that money and you put it in conjunction with some of the money that we got from sales tax because it outperformed what we thought it would, and we pulled back on these other things, yes, there is a chunk of money that's sitting there, but that's not something you see year in and year out. Now, specifically, why do we still have it? One, there's a lot of things that you have to make sure you qualify to spend the ARPA money and process that you go through for that. And the other reason is that we're fortunate. As I said, our revenue from sales tax and everything worked to where we didn't have to spend it to run our organization. So when we programmed this year's budget, we didn't just say, oh, what's all the stuff we ever wanted as a city and throw it in and put it in there. What we decided to do was, one, continue to work through the process with the federal funding and figure out how and what we could best use that for. And two, come back to council when we do, every year we do a strategic retreat with council early in the year to talk about what are those long-term goals. And you talked about it earlier. I am 100%, I'll stay in this job as long as they want to have me. And so what I want to make sure we do is with this, however you feel about the federal government handing out this kind of money, because we will all pay it back at some point. We have this money. And so looking at it and saying, what does the community, what does the council feel like is the best use in the community? Long-term strategic. Now, to the question as it relates to impact fees, could you use it for things that impact fees could use for? Certainly. Could you use it for, any of the other number of projects or things that, anything that's not recurring, right? So it's not going to allow us to hire more police or fire or something because it won't continue to go on and on. You don't want to do it like that. But yeah, you could use it for lots of projects. And so that's an option for council to consider. You certainly could. But the fact that it hasn't been spent on that is because what we want to do is take a very long-term strategic approach at it. And we're not in a situation where we have to use that money now. And the same thing I would say to anybody who just all of a sudden came into an amount of money they didn't expect is you may know exactly what you want to do with it and the best benefit. And if you do, that's fantastic. But if you don't have to spend it right away, looking and saying like, okay, what do I do with this? What does the community want to do with it? What do we see as our long-term? What's that mission, that point we're seeing way in the future? That's why it's there, is because of kind of all those factors coming into play. So definitely I want to see our reserves stay in that 20 to 25% range. Also because we have the second highest bond rating you can have, as an organization. And part of the reason we have that is because we have the reserves. So the people that rate us know that we're fiscally sound. And last year, our 2 raters said that they believe we're as fiscally sound a city as there is. Those things keep our bond rates low. I think the last time we borrowed at 1.82%. And if you're borrowing at 1.82% and the inflation is 5 or 6%, you can do the math there. That's where we want to be. So kind of a complex answer, but that's where it falls out. It's not that we just year in and year out carry twice as much. It's the fact that we do try and carry 25%, even though the fiscal policy is lower, because of we want to be ready in case something does happen, and because it creates financial stability across the organization. And then we outperformed what we thought we would over this last year, which nobody really knew what was going to happen. And then you've got this large influx of cash from the federal government that will have to be spent. And again, could be spent on a lot of the same things that you spend property tax, sales tax, or impact fees on.
Absolutely. No, Bryan, thank you for your answer to that. And look, thank you for spending time with us today and walking through these issues. Very complex, and we appreciate your leadership at City College Station and all that you've done to have this be an open dialogue across the board before your involvement in these chamber chats with the chamber and through your work in the city. And, we look forward to continuing to see this issue develop and see where it goes. And thank you for your support of the chamber, for all you do. And gosh, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I always want to, I give a shout out to my staff and the work they do, but also again to the people in the development community, and just whether it's the neighborhood HOAs or whoever, people that have been involved in this. I know again, people have their own lives that they're trying to do, and they take time to be engaged on what's a really important topic, is a good thing. And hopefully to know that as a government, our goal is to try and shape the way we do business towards what the community wants, and that takes engagement. And so the more of it we get, even if it's that the community doesn't feel the way that maybe we do about something, hey, the better we can serve the community. So I appreciate that everybody does that, and appreciate you guys giving us the opportunity, and certainly everything the chamber does.
Thank you very much, Bryan, and to all our viewers and those listening, thank you very much. Y'all have a great day, and watch for our 4th part in the series coming up as well. Thanks again. Take care.
Thanks.